Today we will recap the movie called The Dare, 2019. In this extremely cruel act, a man uses his hand to prop open a woman's mouth. He inserts a tube, measuring over 18 centimeters, directly into her mouth. From a small red cloth bag, he takes out a large flesh-eating cockroach and places it inside the tube. The cockroach slides down the tube. Watching in horror, the man instinctively covers his mouth, fearing that he might be the next victim. With the tube inside the woman's mouth, the man removes his hand, allowing the cockroaches to go down her throat. The woman lies on the ground, vomiting, but there's no relief from her suffering. In an attempt to ease her pain, the man uses a knife to stab her stomach. He then rotates the knife 360 degrees before pulling it along her body up to her chest. After retracting the knife, he places his hand into the wound and extracts the woman's heart directly. Blood is spat out by the woman, and she ceases to breathe. If you feel that this woman died too badly, you are wrong. The woman's name is Kate, and 20 years ago was a very naughty child. She put a giant cockroach in Mike's mouth. Mike was too scared to move, and the other kids saw this, and not only did they not come up to stop it, they came up and covered Mike's mouth. Mike tried to break free, his face was all red, and finally, the cockroach was swallowed by him. Seeing Mike so cowardly, Kate brought a handful of poisonous spiders, all put on Mike's head. The poisonous spiders got into Mike's ears. He shouted helplessly. Mike wanted to run away, but a few naughty children soon came after him. They first nailed Mike's hand to the ground, and then a huge handful of giant worms thrown into his face. Mike was too scared to move, but the naughty children turned away. That's when Kate found Mike again and said she was taking him to a mysterious place, and then he was taken to a scary cabin. Kate told Mike to go inside. Mike was very scared. Kate then lied to him and said, "I will kiss you if you go inside." Mike believed her. The moment he went inside the room, something covered his mouth. There was a naughty child there, but that child didn't help him or call the police. Instead, the child just turned and left. From that time on, Mike was trapped in a pigsty. There were no blankets, no mattresses, just a heavy chain. He realized that he was being held captive by really bad people. Every day, a person named John gave him raw meat to eat, but he also made Mike work all the time. If Mike worked a bit slower, they would shoot high-pressure water at him. If he ate a bit slower, they would stick a fork into his leg. Tonight, Mike couldn't bear it anymore. He managed to escape. He ran and ran, until he stopped. He didn't know where to go on the road ahead, and there wasn't another safe place. So, he turned back and went to the hut again. From that point on, he started exercising more. He wanted to become taller and stronger, so he could get his revenge someday. More than 10 years have gone by, and Mike has become an adult now. On this particular day, Mike and two men started fighting. John, who was a really cruel person, hit Mike and he fell down. John was a very nasty person who did terrible things. He put one of Mike's legs in chains and there was boiling water below. Mike pleaded with John, asking him to stop and begging for mercy. Then something happened. John suddenly started coughing. Mike acted quickly. He stood up, untied the chain, and jumped down from where he was. He hit John until John was unconscious. Then, Mike hung John up in a similar way. It turned out that Mike's parents had been searching for him all those years. But John didn't want Mike's parents to find him. So, he did something really bad. He set fire to Mike's parents to stop them from finding him. Angry and upset, Mike slowly lowered the chain. John ended up falling into the boiling water and died soon after. Mike was so mad that he did something really cruel. He tore off John's face and made a terrible mask out of it for himself. Things have changed a lot for him now, and it's all because of those 4 mischievous kids. Mike has decided he wants to get back at them. Grown-up George was playing with the children, but then something happened. He got hit and lost consciousness. When he woke up, he found himself in a hidden room. In that room, there were 2 men and a woman, and one of them, Philip, was very close to dying. George was really confused. He tried to stand up and leave, but his arms were locked in place. Nobody really knows why they've all been trapped here. George thought maybe he could dig a hole in the wall to escape, but Tom warned him that it might not be a good idea. George didn't listen and still tried to dig. Unfortunately, he accidentally broke his fingernail. He ended up on the ground, screaming because of the pain. Since digging the wall didn't work, he thought about digging a tunnel instead. But when he did, he found a human skull. It seems like there's no way out of this chamber. George saw a camera on the wall above him, and he got really mad at it. He said some angry words to the camera. This scared Tom and Kate a lot. They told George he should be quiet to avoid getting into more trouble. Soon after, Mike came to the door. When George saw how big and strong Mike was, he got a bit scared. Mike moved Philip to the middle of the room and then gave a knife to Kate. Mike told her to cut off a piece of flesh from Philip's body. Then, Mike threw the knife to George. But George didn't do what Mike wanted. Instead, George took the knife and tried to hurt Mike with it. Mike reacted quickly and moved out of the way fast. He hit George and made him fall down with just one punch. To punish George for not listening, Mike did something mean. He made Kate eat a cockroach. After a while, George found part of a sharp tool accidentally. He quietly used it to cut the rope that was holding him. When Mike entered the room again, George used the sharp tool to cut Mike and then quickly ran away. The door was locked, so George hurriedly climbed into the ventilation system. But, to his surprise, the ventilation system was old and broken. George fell down. When he woke up, he wasn't just in the room again, he was also chained up with a huge chain. Seeing George wake up, Mike entered the room with an axe. He gave the axe to Tom, who then hit George and made him lose consciousness. After that, Mike took out some nails and told Tom to use the axe to nail George to a board. When Tom swung the axe down, George woke up suddenly because of the pain. But the pain was so much that he passed out again very quickly. When Mike finished nailing both of George's hands, he seemed satisfied and left the room. George, even though he was in a lot of pain, gathered his strength and pulled hard to get his hands off the board. This made Tom really uncomfortable to watch. After George calmed down a bit, he started thinking about who Mike really is and why he's hurting them so badly. Philip, who was close to dying, said he had a mark on his hand that looked like a horse's hoof. At that moment, George remembered something important from 20 years ago. It was about what they, the four of them, had done. They were young and didn't realize the trouble they were causing back then. They never thought of apologizing. George started thinking about what might happen if a bunch of spider eggs were put into someone's ear. Then Mike came in holding a syringe filled with yellow spider eggs. He told George to put those eggs directly into Kate's ears. And if he didn't do it, Mike said he would use a taser on him. Kate had no choice but to agree with what Mike wanted. Mike grabbed Kate's hair, moved her head, and then pushed a tube filled with spider eggs deep into her ears. After that, Mike lifted Philip and shook him hard. Then he slammed Philip against the wall above, making sure Philip was dead. Mike went back to the room, took out a picture of Philip, and drew a big X on it. Inside the secret room, George and Tom were arguing and even fighting physically. Mike eventually arrived in the room, but by then, George was already lying motionless on the floor. Even when Mike used a high-pressure water gun on George, it didn't help. Mike went closer to check on George, and suddenly, George got up and grabbed Mike. He called for Tom to grab the water gun quickly. But before Tom could do anything, Mike knocked George down again. Tom tried to attack Mike, but Mike managed to control him. Kate tried to pick up a hose, but Mike knocked her down too. Once Mike had Tom under control, he told Kate to put a flesh-eating worm into Tom's eyes. The worm went into Tom's eyeball really quickly. Mike was about to harm George even more when Kate suddenly began to speak up. After a while, Mike passed out. He grabbed the water can and left the room. Tom's eye hurt a lot. With Kate's help, George took out Tom's eyeballs. When Mike came back into the room, he started breaking things. It didn't take long before he destroyed the whole room. The lights in the secret room flickered again. This meant that Mike was coming back. Tom wanted to find a knife to protect himself. He asked George for it, but George wouldn't give it to him. The two men started struggling with each other. In the struggle, George accidentally stabbed the knife into Mike's mouth. George quickly pulled the knife out, and Mike died. But then Kate snatched the knife from George. Just when Kate was pointing the knife at George, Mike came from behind and wrapped his arms around Kate's neck. Mike managed to take the knife away from Kate. This time, George said something really sincere: "You're a good person. If we had known what you were going through, we wouldn't have left you back then." Surprisingly, Mike actually started to believe him. Slowly, George took the knife out of his hand. Then, something unexpected happened. Kate bit Mike. Mike turned around because of the pain, and that's when George stabbed him in the stomach with the knife again. The pain made Mike turn around once more. George used the knife to stab Kate in the stomach, and then Mike broke her belly open. After that, Mike made a strange request. He asked George to end his life. This request made George feel really suspicious and scared. He got so scared that he turned around and ran away. The two of them chased each other and struggled, but George managed to get away from the cabin. However, he didn't go too far from the cabin. Mike followed him with a knife and kept asking George to kill him. George didn't want to do it. Mike pushed George down and said, "If you don't kill me right now, I'll go and take your daughter to live with me." Just when George felt like he was going to lose, he touched the knife on the ground. Finally, Mike ended up on the ground with serious injuries. 10 years later, George's two grown-up daughters came to play in the forest. Suddenly, Mike showed up again. And that's the end of the movie. This movie teaches us a lesson: never bully others because some people's patience can be way bigger than you think. Revenge might come after 10 years, or even 20 years.